Today, we're going to talk about a topic which concerns every family across America today, which is the topic of phone bans at schools. Is this a good thing? When you're in charge of a school, how do you put this in place? And how do you create a healthy learning environment? So to explore these questions, I am joined by Ari Engelberg, the head of communications and strategic initiatives at Harvard-Westlake, one of the most prestigious independent schools in the United States. Timing for this conversation is great since this summer, Opal announced a partnership with Harvard-Westlake on the implementation of a new phone policy in their school. We created a product. It's called Opal For Schools. It's a product that helps school implement a phone policy that actually works for students, for parents, and for educators. Here's how it works. Every student gets the app. They scan their phone when entering school every morning. Students keep their phones with them during the day, but all the distracting apps like Instagram, TikTok are automatically blocked during school hours. And third, the school gets a daily dashboard showing which students follow the policy and which didn't, so that educators can have follow-up conversations with students for accountability. So I'm incredibly excited for this very timely conversation with Ari. Let's dive right in.
I'm excited to be here and excited to chat about these topics.
You are in Los Angeles, and last year, or actually this year, Los Angeles became the largest school district in the US to ban smartphones in class. I think it was voted last summer in June, and the school by the school board, and rollout is happening this year. And so you lived through this as an executive of the prominent school in Los Angeles. So I'm wondering what was the last 12 months like for you in this area?
Yeah. And as an interesting footnote, the LAUSD school board member who proposed the resolution that ultimately became the rule in LAUSD is Nick Melvoin, who is an alumnus of Harvard-Westlake. And I know him well and speak regularly with him about that topic. As an independent school, Harvard-Westlake is not governed by the policies of the LA Unified School District, but we certainly pay attention to what they're doing, and they pay attention to what we're doing. There has been, for the last couple of years, a building concern in thoughtful schools around the country that phones have gone from being occasionally useful in the education setting to being abused in the education setting, that they distract student attention, both potentially in class, but certainly deprive them of the value and the joy of being in a community when they are not in class because they're spending time looking at their screens instead of looking at one another. And so we decided that we needed to take action, began conversations not only with colleagues within the school district, but also at lots of other schools around LA. Could we arrive at a joint statement and maybe consider doing something as a collective? Because frankly, there's safety in numbers, and it's a lot easier to share a policy with a school community, parents, or students who may be temporarily upset by a policy if we know and they know that really all schools or many schools are pursuing a similar effort. And so we created a coalition of schools last year, and a number of schools in LA, in addition to obviously the LAUSD, signed on and have begun implementing various versions of effectively a phone ban on their campuses.
Yep. You touch upon the group nature of this problem. It's hard. It's a hard problem to solve individually as a school, individually as a parent. It's very hard to impose a change or impose a law or impose a rule in that context. I mean, I'm sure that's the spirit of this, right? Like you want to make sure that it's a group effort. Do you mind explaining to us specifically what problems you're seeing? So you mentioned,
Sure.
Yeah, just how does that show up in school?
There are a variety of different problems that manifest when you put technology, especially, mobile phone technology, in the hands of students. We'll get to it. There are also some wonderful advantages and some really good uses, which is one of the reasons why we have decided not to pursue a strategy of simply having students put their phone in a bag and seal it off for the day, is that you eliminate all those opportunities. In terms of the things that we've seen, the obvious ones are distractions that occur in the classroom, students forgetting to turn their phones on silent or turn them off. The phone rings or notifications sound during class, and that's distracting to colleagues and teachers or peers and teachers. When they have these handheld devices, there is the temptation when the teacher's looking away to sneak a peek at their phone, which is distracting. And there's a bunch of now kind of brain science that really shows that every time a student is, engaged in what's going on with the classroom and then looks at their phone, even though they might look at their phone for 10 seconds, it takes quite a bit longer for their brain to get re-engaged in the material because they're still left thinking about what they saw on the device. And so, we know that the distraction is a lot longer than the couple of seconds that it takes to look at the phone. So those are the things that we see in classrooms. Of course, there's always the potential for things like academic dishonesty, right? Cheating, using devices. That's been the case with laptops as well. And so, we certainly have policies around that when it comes to taking tests, but it's another temptation. Beyond the distraction in the classrooms, the things that we were most concerned about is we would see students leaving class, for example, and there's a 5-minute passing period before the next class. And I would stand in my doorway in the hallway, and there's a classroom down the hall. And as students are leaving the classroom to venture on to their next class or their next obligation, every single one of them would pull their phone out of their bag and look at their phone. And I would see this parade of students kind of glued to their devices as they walk down the halls, kind of, blindly, to be honest. I mean, they could walk into a wall and might not know it. Very quiet, very little personal interaction. And then when we would wander down to what we call the quad, sort of the lunch area where students hang out and eat and mingle between classes or during free periods, we would see, 10 years ago, certainly 30 years ago when I was a student, 40 years ago, geez, we would see, groups of students sitting around a table talking. And you go down there today, or, as of last year, and you could see groups of students sitting around a table, and every single one of them would be on their phones. And I understand that in some cases they're using the phones for academic work, or they're communicating with family or friends, or they're engaged in multiplayer games that have a certain social component to them. I understand that you can defend some of the activity. I would argue that on balance, the activity, the community on our quad and on our campus was healthier overall before these phones were introduced and were so pervasive. And the reason why we ended up choosing Opal is what we were hoping to do with our phone policy is give two things back to students. We wanted to give them back community that we felt had been taken away by the sort of addiction to phones. And we wanted to give them back focus, which is to say you're here for relatively brief periods of time. When you think about the total number of hours spent in, say, history class or chemistry class over the course of a school year, it's just not that much. Um, when you're there, let's remove the distractions, so that you can give yourself and your colleagues the gift of focus on the academic subject. And then when you're not in class and you're on campus, between 8 and 3 p.m., 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., which is our school hours, that you're going to give your attention to your peers. You're going to be part of a community and not part of whatever's going on online. And yeah, so that was what we were hoping to achieve. And that we hope will address the problems that we've seen over the last several years.
Well, I wanted to know a little bit more about the decision process of, you are in charge of this program at Harvard-Westlake. I think you mentioned you put together a group of schools. Like, how was your decision process from there?
Well, what we first did was a number of folks internally at Harvard-Westlake put together a presentation to our leadership team to convince the leadership team that this was an initiative worth spending time and energy on. That was a fairly easy thing to gain consensus about, the principle that there should be less phone use on campus. How we went about that, of course, was something that we spent a year um, to develop. So we created a policy work group on campus that I led, that involved a number of stakeholders, students, faculty and staff, administrators, parents, our school counselors, and began talking about the different manifestations of a phone policy. We didn't call it a phone ban because we weren't confident that we were going to ban phones. And as it turns out, we're not entirely banning phones. I can tell you how our policy is going to work. But it was a number of conversations. We did some surveys, some interviews, and then began looking at potential solutions. And, it comes down to basic categories. One is, do you remove phones completely from the possession of students, or you remove phone access completely during the school day? Or do you develop some sort of hybrid approach And we decided that we would pursue a hybrid approach. And there were a couple of reasons. One is that, as I alluded to earlier, there are, in fact, a number of benefits to having phones on campus. Everything from emergency communications to specific classroom applications. Our physics teachers use a pendulum app, for example. The camera is used in classrooms, calculators, and the list goes on and on of specialty education apps. And so we wanted our teachers and our students to continue to enjoy the benefit of those, where if a teacher said, I want you to pull out your phones and launch the following app, that they have access to the phones and they can do that for an educational purpose. More broadly, we felt that these students have phones. Typically in our community, it's sort of around sixth grade, around the age of 11 or 12, students get a phone. And so they have them all the time. And what we felt like was that asking students to put a phone in a bag or put a phone in a locker, while it sort of solves the problem on campus to a degree, it's sort of doing, I think, surgery with a butter knife. It's not, in our mind, an elegant solution because it doesn't empower students and teach them how to use these devices more responsibly. And I'm not saying that to criticize other schools that have gone down that path. It's just that what we were hoping to achieve was a healthier relationship between student and device. And we sort of felt like putting the device away in a bag for a number of hours a day is not actually building toward that healthier relationship. And so what we wanted to do was offer a policy that was more nuanced and a platform to augment the policy that was more nuanced. And that's where we began looking at apps like Opal, including, of course, Opal, and ended up selecting Opal as a platform that would help students develop greater focus and be more attentive to their relationships when on campus.
When you guys reached out, we were thrilled about your approach and the spirit in which you approached this, because it's really aligned with what we're trying to do. And so we can say that this product, Opal for School, was really built with you guys in mind, and really listening to your feedback and what you were looking for. And just to do a little segue, like what we try to do is a phone policy that can benefit both students, faculty, and parents. I'd love to hear more about the policy that you've put in place and how that's going to play out starting this year.
The basic policy is going to be that during the school day, students should not use mobile devices except as listed in the policy. And the policy will have certain allowable uses and certain allowable locations on campus. So, for example, a student who has diabetes and uses a glucometer app or has a glucometer that talks to their phone, that's an allowed use, like a medical use. There are certain other uses, for example, communicating with your parents. My soccer practice time got changed and I need to be picked up at 5:00 instead of 3:00. That's the kind of thing that we would expect students to go to a designated place on campus if they want to use their phone to communicate with their parents, as opposed to using their laptop, because they all have access to messages and email on their laptop. But if they want to use their phone to communicate with their parents about an issue like that, there'll be one or two locations on campus, the upper school office, for example, and their dean's offices, where they can use their phone for that purpose in that location. Beyond that, the policy is going to be that phones are put away and are turned off or on silent, no notifications, no audible sounds, and that if they are out for any reason in a location that is not designated or for a use that is not designated, then the phone will be confiscated and returned to them at the end of the day. So in theory, the policy says no phone use on campus. So why do we have Opal? Well, we have Opal because what we're trying to do is help students develop the muscle, the mindfulness, and the willpower around establishing a healthy relationship with their device. And when we did some initial survey work with our student council, who piloted Opal last year for a number of weeks, we found that there was initial grumbling, and then very quickly they came around to, oh, this thing is really helpful because it's reminding me I shouldn't be on this app during this time of day, or I've been on this app too much, and it's really taking away from, other important parts of my life. And so the idea is to combine a policy with a platform that both helps to enforce the policy because it prevents certain apps from being launched on campus without us knowing. In theory, if we execute properly, if a student sneaks into a restroom and takes their phone out and launches Instagram and the Opal's running, we would know that they're doing that, and we can take appropriate action, which is typically to have a conversation with the student about like what's going on, why do you feel the need to get on Instagram during the day, that kind of thing. And so that's the goal, is to combine the policy with the platform and allow them to work in tandem to help students regulate their own choices, their own behavior, and ultimately develop a healthier balance between using the device as a tool, using it for fun when appropriate to use it for fun, but not to have their behavior um, driven by some sort of addictive tendency, which we know there's a lot of addiction.
Thanks for sharing that. Can you tell me a little bit more about the announcement that you're planning, and how you're planning to get buy-in from students and parents
Yeah.
uh, for this
Well,
new policy?
so we previewed the policy 6 months ago with our families and our students, letting them know the next year that there was going to be a significant limitation on the use of phones on campus. And not surprisingly, we got some grumbles from
Yep.
students. There were some articles written in the student newspaper. Some students were actually supportive, some not so much. That's okay. Parents, maybe not surprisingly, I think we got one. There may be more parents who just chose not to raise their hands, but we got, I think, one email in response asking how are students going to be accessible in the event of emergencies. And that was it. Parents, our sense is that, I guess, two things. One is many students, while they may find a lot of utility in these devices and they love them and use them for all kinds of fun, if you strip away the emotion and you actually have sort of an intellectual conversation with them, they'll recognize that they're ultimately probably distracting during certain times of day that are designated for learning or designated for community, and that they're not terribly effective at enhancing the learning experience except in limited situations, and they're not terribly effective at enhancing the community experience when you're physically with people. Um, and so we're not telling students that these devices have no value to their lives, so that they shouldn't be enjoyed and they shouldn't be used in other venues. But for those purposes, and most students get it when it's explained that way. Parents, I think, the experience of parents is that they've had a real difficulty getting their kids off of these devices, in part because parents are also addicted to them. I mean, I use Opal because I struggle with addiction to my phone like everybody else. But also because it's awfully difficult for an individual family to say to their child, you can't use your phone, or you need to have limits on your phone, when all of their friends are in this sort of social ecosystem online.
Sure.
And so I think parents have been grateful that it's action from above, because it's action that affects, as a policy that affects the entire student population. And in fact, because we went and worked with other schools to create this coalition, it's actually, many of our peer schools as well are announcing similar policies. And so there's this sense of, well, everybody's doing it. Everybody's bearing the same burden. Everybody's, sharing in the pain of having to wean yourself off these devices a little bit. And so we can all kind of go through it together. So parents have been very supportive. Students have been less so. But previewed it 6 months ago, and then starting in about 3 weeks from now, we're going to start to communicate the specific steps that we want students to take in anticipation of the school year beginning later in August. And that would obviously involve more formally outlining the
Yeah.
policy with an FAQ, and then asking them to download and install Opal and be ready to launch it on the first day of school.
Yeah, and we're excited to partner with you guys on this. And I think being an educator is also probably sometimes doing things that are not extremely popular with students, but required. But we also want to make sure we can support you guys in having these conversations with students. I mean, we're very optimistic that by the way, we see a lot of teenagers using the app on their own independently as well, which is giving us a lot of comfort that this could be something that students will actually take on and learn to appreciate. And I want to talk a little bit more about the admin side of things. So as part of Opal for Schools, you're going to get an admin dashboard essentially, which is the way I like to think about it is a little bit like an attendance sheet. So, you've got students and then basically the green light, orange light, red light. So, green light is, yeah, they did everything right. They're not, accessing the apps they shouldn't during that day. Orange light is maybe they need a little talking to, and red light is maybe they opted out or did something that they shouldn't have done. Are you thinking, so in spirit, right? It's the idea of being able to reach out to those that have a red light or orange light and say, hey, what happened that day? I'm curious how you're thinking about this conversation and in particular, and some of the research I've found says that for phone regulation in particular, that conversation is actually very important. If you take the phone away and you don't talk and
Correct.
explain, it's
Correct.
not the same as,
Yeah,
hey, let's have a
that
conversation
is
about it.
still candidly
Yeah,
something that we will go through an iterative process of trial and error with different strategies for how to approach students that we know are from the dashboard are struggling with staying off their phones during the day. As you noted, we will know if a student is on campus, and we will know if the student has launched Opal and it's configured properly. And so, in theory, first thing in the morning, we should see only green. If we see students who don't have a green dot, it means that they didn't launch Opal. We can reach out to them and remind them to do so. If it turns yellow, it means that they've used, that
right,
they've done something that is outside the policy. And while we don't have a specific protocol developed, the general the consensus among our deans and our counselors and our advisors is that we will reach out to the student and probably not even after the first offense. We'll probably monitor them to see if this is something that's chronic, and if it's kind of chronic abuse. The way we kind of look at it is like, you're not supposed to drive faster than the speed limit in your car, but it would be awfully harsh
right,
if we were giving kids tickets every single time their car exceeded the speed limit. That what you want to do is try to avoid chronic speeding, because that can
sure,
lead to, that's evidence of dangerous behavior, right, on the roads. The same thing is true here. If there's an occasional
yeah,
misuse of a phone during the day, we are inclined to be more generous. If it appears to be chronic based on the dashboard, that's when we would have a conversation with the student. What exactly is going on that you need to see, access your phone? Is there some use that we're not aware of? Is there some app that you need to use for some reason
right,
that we're not aware of? If that's not the case,
right,
then it pivots to a conversation about what is going on that generates the impulse to look at your phone, and how can we work together to break that habit? And that will be it'll be on a case by case basis, depending on the student, depending on what they say, depending on their needs. Potentially address it with parents as well, and we'll take those cases as they come.
and like you mentioned, this is experimentation, and it is required, right? Not only for, I think, Harvard-Westlake, but also for the entire education. I don't believe there's a single solution, like silver bullet right now, to this solution. So you kind of have to do it. But and it's great that you guys are taking on these bold ideas and are open to this culture of trying something bold. Is there a secret, maybe perhaps for other educators, to kind of encourage them to take bold action and to try something new that you can think of? Is there something that you could give as a tip to another educator trying to post a smart phone policy in the school?
I mean, not having executed yet, it would be presumptuous of me to offer tips, but we are fortunate at Harvard-Westlake to have a very low student to teacher or student to faculty and staff ratio. And that means that there are a number of adults around to help monitor the dashboard and to help intervene with students who may have difficulty staying off their phones during the day if the dashboard reveals that they've been using their phone. Um, the Not every school has that luxury. Um, so I think schools are going to have to, who believe in the value of having students use their phones less during the day, are going to have to look at what resources they have available, at the size of their student population, at the kinds of uses that students are finding for their phones, or the kinds of uses that students are abusing on their phones, and then adjust accordingly. So, you know, I can speak to some of the criteria that we looked at. I will say that like our general philosophy is one that we strongly believe in, that the goal should be in the spirit of education and of developing better humans, right? Which is really what we're trying to do, is to figure out what is the most sophisticated, whatever word you want to use, approach to helping students manage the relationship that they have with this device. That is a powerful relationship. We know that it is. It's in their hand or in their pocket or maybe as far as their backpack, and that's about it. Almost 24 hours, right? They put it on their nightstand or on their desk at home, and then it's in their pocket, it's in their bag, it's in their car. It's always with them. It's always beeping. There's always some kind of information coming to them. There's always something that they can access on this device, whether it's information or communication or entertainment. That means that the relationships that we have with these devices are pervasive. They're kind of always omnipresent, and they're powerful relationships that, literally create release of neurotransmitters in the brain that stimulate like feelings. And so we can't just pretend, I think, and our collective decision was, we can't just pretend that we are helping a student really understand what's going on in the relationship they have with this device, and really learn to manage that relationship long term for their own benefit and the benefit of their community, by telling them to just lock it in a bag or a drawer or a locker for a few hours. That's maybe a little bit more around like why we came, the philosophy that we're using. Is it messier? Yeah. Is it cleaner just to put it in a locker or a bag? Certainly there's an argument that it's cleaner to do it that way. Our approach is messier. I would argue, and I don't think many educators would disagree, that education is messy. And sometimes the mess is a good thing. Sometimes mess is a good thing,
Yeah,
because that's how you
absolutely.
you learn by, you're challenged, you have to adapt, you grow from the struggles of figuring things out. And that's what we're going to do collectively with this policy.
Very excited. Ari, thank you very much for this conversation and can't wait for this new year.
Thanks for having me. And I'm always happy to answer questions of, if you have listeners who want to reach out about the situations that they're dealing with at their schools and learn anything more from what we're doing at Harvard-Westlake. My contact info is on hw.com, and happy to field questions.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.